Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. Once again, I promise we will go full Charlie Sykes on today's podcast, edition of the Bulwark Podcast. And our guest today is a returnee, although with a different role. I think last time Olivier Knox was on the Bulwark Podcast, he was a host over at Sirius XM, and now he is the author of the Daily 202 newsletter for the Washington Post. So welcome back, Olivier.
Thanks very much, Charlie.
So I used to have I had conversations with James Hohmann, who was your predecessor, putting out this newsletter, and I have to admit that that was one of the inspirations that I had for putting out my own daily newsletter, which is just like, what was I thinking? I mean, honestly, you and I were chatting about this, having to come up with a fresh, original take every single day. It's like, that's, you would think that with the news cycle being what it is, that would be easy, but I don't know. Trust me, it is tough, isn't it? But without challenging and interesting.
Without boasting that I'm delivering a fresh, original take every day. I will say, yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, the news environment today offers fewer handholds and footholds because a lot of it's very serious. There isn't the sort of shiny Twitter object that there was in the Trump era. There's a lot of meaty stuff. I would never describe it as boring because the stakes are so enormously high in public policy and politics today. But yes, of course it's a challenge. And there are definitely days when I look across the news landscape and, the meatiest story is an in the weeds piece on healthcare. And I got to say, I'm kind of a generalist. I gravitate towards foreign policy, but if you're getting your health policy takes from me, well, you need an upgrade.
Well, then there's also the challenge of coming up with a take when all takes are taken these days. I mean, we live in a world where through social media, whatever it is you were thinking of saying has already been said by somebody. I mean, there was a time when I actually thought, if I don't say this, this point will not be made. That is just not the case anymore. Somebody is going to make this point. Okay, so before we get into other things, I just want to get your take on the burning controversy. Where do you come down on wearing masks outside? This has been the debate over social media. Great piece in the Atlantic saying, guys, you don't really need to wear that mask when you're outside. It's pretty much all performative. So where do you come down on that?
So when I'm out walking in my neighborhood, I have a mask with me. Right. I don't wear one. One of the challenges with the term outside is that in my neighborhood, at least, outside dining doesn't actually meet the criteria of outside. We have restaurants that are enclosed on three sides, and one side is open. That is not outdoors. So in a setting like that, I would probably, just to put my fellow citizens at ease, would probably wear a mask whenever I could. I'm now fully cooked. As of Sunday, I've had my 2 doses and the time has lapsed, so I am vaccinated, which means that means that my ability to spread this nasty little bug is very much diminished. But if I'm walking around outside, I definitely have a mask with me. I probably don't wear it all that much, even though I shouldn't say this, of course, on the podcast because Larry Hogan has maintained his outdoor mask wearing mandate. So I'm a scofflaw. But, outdoors, well ventilated. I'm not near other citizens. I'm not putting them at risk. If I thought there were any chance that I was putting fellow citizens at risk, I would definitely wear the mask.
See, this is the question, though, because the science would indicate that if you are fully cooked, as I am as well, we've had the vaccinations, we're immune. We ought to act like we're immune. I'm sorry to quote Ron DeSantis here. I'm going to hate myself for it. But we are pretty much immune. And when you're outside, there's no evidence really that when you're just walking past anybody. But I have to admit that after a year of this, it's hard to make that mental switch. My wife and I took a vacation, my post-vaccination vacation last week to visit the family. And for the first time in more than a year, I went into a restaurant. And I have to admit that even though I knew that we were both vaccinated, we knew that the risk was minimal, if any, it was still kind of I kind of had to overcome that. So again, I don't think it's a bad thing that people wear the masks. I think that if you're modeling good behavior, that's great. But this is we're in the end game though, aren't we now, of the coronavirus?
Yeah, I think we are. I think we are. I mean, I don't want to jinx it, and we suddenly discover a variant that shoots right through the vaccine. But no, I think we are towards the end game. I think that, and I'm married to a virologist, so
Oh,
I get my up to date information here. But no, we are nearing the end game. I agree with you. There are some things where I feel very socialized over the past year. Um, I went to the mall for the first time yesterday and wore a mask the entire time, not because I'm spreading it, but because again we're modeling good behavior,
right.
and because it's the governor's orders. But no, I don't think I will miss mask wearing. I think the stuff that's more problematic for me right now is in my people greet each other with kisses on the cheek. I don't know how that's gonna. I don't know whether that's gonna survive this pandemic. Don't know about hugs and handshakes. I'm looking forward to physical contact with people who are not in my immediate family. Um, I mean, yeah, I hope it's true. I hope that we are near the end of this thing. I mean, it's been an unbelievably horrible ride over the last year and a half.
So let's stick with this. Two things that I know that you've been writing about. Number one is confronting vaccination hesitancy, vaccine hesitancy, and also you had your newsletter yesterday was focused on the boom in fake vaccine passports. Now, I mean, I think those vaccine passports are can play a significant role in raising public a sense of confidence, but tell me a little bit about what you found out about counterfeit vaccine passports and why anyone would use them and how big a problem it is.
It's a big enough problem, Charlie, that more than 40 attorneys general in the United States wrote to some of the leading internet commerce CEOs and said, please crack down on this. Please track this data. Please try to help us stop the sale of these fake vaccination cards. So it's hard to put a number on it, but it is a significant enough problem that it's reached that level of attention among law enforcement. What I think is really a couple of things that I think are very striking. The first is that people seem to be going through to more trouble to get this counterfeit card than they would to actually get the vaccine.
Well, yes.
Uh, like not since 18-year-old Olivier Knox arrived in New York City and promptly headed to Times Square to get a fake ID has anyone put so much effort into something so unnecessary. You can get the vaccine for no money. You can get the card for no money. So really, this is a product that appeals, I think, mostly to people who are refusing to get the vaccine. That's the first thing I would say.
So these are the people who don't intend to get vaccinated but want people to think that they are. Interesting.
Right. Right. That's my. I mean, and again, I'm speculating a little bit here. I don't think it's the underserved communities that are having trouble getting a vaccine who are going online to get a counterfeit card, or for that matter, a blank card that then they fill out. I don't think that's who's doing that.
Well, this was something that was apparently not foreseen by the government because they came up with a format that was very, very easy to copy, very, very easy to counterfeit. Just these little cardboard things. So, was this something that they didn't think would happen, or they didn't even think about? What? I mean,
Well, my colleague Dan Diamond did a
yeah.
lot of digging into this and found that in fact initially they'd planned a digital version of this.
Hmm.
And it's not totally clear to me why they abandoned it. Although if you look at the reaction, some might say overreaction to the idea of digital vaccine passports, you can get a sense of why they might have been a little bit gun shy on this. I mean, there are. I don't mean to play this down. There are legitimate reasons to be a little leery of a digital vaccine passport. For a number, we can get into that if you'd like.
Mm.
But it seems to me that they anticipated this being just the latest political front line in the coronavirus political wars. The idea that a lot of people they don't want to share this kind of information with the state or federal government, and they don't want to have to prove that they've been vaccinated. So it looks to me like they planned to do a digital product for a while, and then it fell apart, and they fell back on this extremely simple, low tech approach that unfortunately lends itself to the kind of counterfeiting that we're seeing.
So, as of yesterday or today, all adults in the country are eligible to get the vaccination. So, we're a few weeks away from really everyone who wants to be vaccinated is going to be vaccinated, and the people who are not vaccinated simply have chosen not to. Is that fair?
Fair-ish, because
Ish.
it's people 16 or over.
Yeah, I'm talking adults. Yeah.
So
So
so not everybody, but yes, everyone over 16 is now is eligible and can now go get their shot.
so now we've moved from the stage of would there be enough supply and access to the question of can we do something about the people who are hesitant to take the vaccines? And by the way, the word hesitant, isn't that a euphemism? I mean,
Yes.
I wonder, do you know who ever came up with that? I'm vaccine
Uh,
hesitant. No, you're being
I
pig-headed. You're being an idiot. I mean, it's like what? What do you mean hesitant? I don't
it
know.
it
You know?
sounds like it actually sounds like a very public health
Oh yeah.
term. Something cooked up in a
What?
very well-intentioned scientific community kind of way.
Yeah, there was a committee with a whiteboard that came up with hesitancy. So what is the Biden administration planning to do? Is there anything you can do to really break down the cultural, political, religious barriers that keep people from getting the vaccines?
I think the evidence is that there is. You
Okay.
remember when vaccine hesitancy numbers among Latinos and African Americans were really high
Hmm.
in August of September of last year. Those numbers have dropped really, really significantly, and that correlates, one, with, of course, Biden taking office, but also with a fairly aggressive outreach campaign by the state and federal governments to get these folks to agree to get vaccinated. Um, the bigger challenge at the moment, Charlie, is diehard Trump voters who are saying that they will not get the vaccine, and the way that the administration has tried to reach those folks is largely through community faith leaders and local officials. They don't. I'm sure you've seen the high-profile, former presidents getting the vaccine on camera, celebrities, either athletic or Hollywood, getting the shot. That doesn't that doesn't tend to, well, I'm going to say move the needle, and I apologize. That doesn't really change much, but the local efforts are the ones that really reach people. But still what we're seeing is, if you're a white male who voted for Donald Trump, you are in the most likely category to say that you are not going to get this vaccine.
So obviously, the big story this week, one way or another, and it's going to dominate. I just have a sense it's going to dominate. It's going to dominate conversation and headlines for some time. Will be the verdict from the Derek Chauvin case and any
Yeah.
fallout from that. And of course, you have a lot of conservative media who are focusing on the comments by Maxine Waters, where she said, we want a guilty verdict. We're going to stay in the streets. So we have to be more confrontational." Which struck me as imprudent and sort of the kind of thing that Maxine Waters does, but also rather generic. People calling for people to protest, rather generic. Again, I think given the tinderbox and given how fragile things are right now, everybody needs to be more circumspect, more careful about their language. But it is interesting the way everyone from Marjorie Taylor Greene to Kevin McCarthy have just decided that, okay, now they are outraged about language that might incite violence.
Well, sure, and part of it is an effort to create a kind of tornado of whataboutism, right? Well, you say we do this,
Yeah.
but look over there. I mean, you've got some people who are essentially sentient YouTube comment sections who are suddenly outraged about language, um, and yeah, it's hard not to be cynical. I will say your tinderbox point's really important, though. I mean, the not in a very long time has the country been so focused on the outcome of one trial at this level in our judicial system. And I think I mean, I'm worried. I don't know about you. I'm worried about the results,
I'm
of
very
course.
worried.
But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is again, you're trying to create this, I know you are, but what am I kind of political dynamic. Um,
Well, no, I mean, there is a certain level of cynicism here. I mean, you mentioned the tornado of whataboutism. There's no question about it that Republicans have seized on this as part of their effort to memory hold January 6th to say, well, it wasn't that bad. You had Tucker Carlson saying that Maxine Waters was more dangerous than Donald Trump. You have the New York Post, who's basically calling for, impeach and removal of Maxine Waters, because if what Trump did is bad, then we need to do the same thing. So all of that is, flattens the experience. and continues to engage in that historical revisionism. So we'll see what happens. You are right. I'm trying to think of the last time there was a case that we knew in advance was going to be this. I mean, even the OJ verdict was, of course, rather dramatic, but I don't think anybody anticipated that it was going to play out quite the way that it did. We had the LA riots and everything, but I guess part of it is that people have followed this trial so carefully, and the evidence is so compelling, but people need to be reminded that to convict someone, the burden is tough. You have to show intent. And that's the question. And all that defense attorney needs to do is find one juror who has a reasonable doubt, and we got a problem. So, but you're this is playing out on a political, cultural, social, legal plane, and it's hard to overstate what the stakes are here.
I agree. The thing I would add is, we are relearning one of the lessons of Rodney King, which is the difference that video footage makes in the way that the nation perceives something like this. I mean, this would still be a dramatic and terrible case without the video footage of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck. But that video, I dare say a majority of Americans have seen it. It changes the way we perceive what's going on in the courtroom very much. And again, I go, we are fellow old guys. And so I think back to the video of the police beating Rodney King. And I think, well, same dynamic. That would have been a completely different legal process if the nation did not have at its ready disposal the video, the moments in which this happened.
Because people feel that they saw, in real time what happened, and of course they did. Well, let's not prejudge that particular case. So, other things that are happening, major stories. We are sort of back on Earth 2.0, where major stories are in fact major stories. While I was on vacation, the president announced plans to withdraw from Afghanistan. You're writing today about the questions that are still hanging over to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So what do you think? You have the 4 questions for General McKenzie on Afghanistan.
Yes, that's right.
So what are they? What do we still need to know? What has been unanswered?
Well, I think what we want is we want to get General McKenzie's perspective. He runs Central Command, which therefore will oversee the withdrawal from Afghanistan as laid out by President Biden. I think first and foremost, lawmakers are going to ask him point blank whether the withdrawal makes America less safe from the prospect of future terrorist attacks using Afghanistan as a springboard. 9/11 being the obvious example. That's in part because the CIA director, Bill Burns, testified last week that there was a significant risk, and those are his words, that ISIS and Al Qaeda would try to reconstitute in larger numbers inside Afghanistan. And he said that the withdrawal would necessarily reduce the resources that America has to track and neutralize those groups. So I think the first question would be to get General McKenzie's general sense of how the military will compensate for not having boots on the ground. I think that's very important. My colleague Missy Ryan wrote a pretty good explainer on the kinds of things that they are looking at, but it's different when you hear directly from the head of Central Command. That's the first question I have. The second question is actually something that has nagged at me since close to right after 9/11, which it has to do with what do we expect to see from Pakistan? This is a fragile nuclear-armed country with a very serious homegrown extremist problem. It's the kind of thing that used to keep people up at night. We haven't heard about it since I think Barack Obama was doing what was called AFPAC, kind of annoyingly, in his White House. So the question is, okay, the United States withdraws. What happens to Pakistan and in Pakistan, where they have, as I said, they have their own homegrown extremism problem. They've mostly used the last 20 years. They've mostly steered their extremists towards Afghanistan instead of dealing with it at home. So what happens there? Mm-hmm. A third one is, can the government in Kabul and the Afghan security forces, military and police, withstand the Taliban? And this is a really big question because a lot of the Democratic criticisms of Biden's withdrawal plan center on what's going to happen to Afghan women and girls. Can they withhold? Can the Afghan forces withstand this rather effective fighting force that is the Taliban. Both the president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, and his national security advisor have said, yes, we can hold our own as long as we continue to get Western funding and logistical help. But that's a really, really big question. I mean, just go look at what Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen said even before Biden formally announced his withdrawal. She basically said it imperils the gains in Afghanistan, especially those related to the rights of women. So that's another one. And then I've got a throwaway as my fourth, which is what would you do different? What would you have done differently, General? That's a throwaway because it is very rare for generals, active duty generals, to break with the commander in chief rather than simply line up behind the decision, whatever their private misgivings were. But I know we're going to hear about that from some of the Afghanistan hawks on the House Armed Services Committee today.
You know, it was rather striking when you had the CIA director, though, make the statement that he made last week. And were you surprised by that? I mean, so far we've seen the Biden administration present a pretty solid front on almost every issue, but that was a pretty dramatic moment.
It confirms for me that Bill Burns is going to be someone to watch and listen to over the course of the first Biden term. I think. I'm sure you remember, Charlie, that when he was doing his confirmation hearing, he actually leaned pretty farther forward than the Biden administration had on the risk posed by China. He said that if he were in charge, he would be encouraging American institutions of higher education to break relations with the so-called Confucius centers that are basically influence operations for Beijing. So he's been pretty darn candid this year on pretty big aspects of foreign policy. It was striking. I mean, he did suggest, the CIA will find ways to mitigate this, and so will the military. But it is striking. I don't expect anything less from Bill Burns, who, after all, is a very highly regarded career diplomat. Not really one. He can be diplomatic, but he doesn't necessarily mince words. But again, I think it's going to be interesting to watch him on all manner of foreign policy, because now on two occasions, two of the biggest foreign policy dossiers that Biden faces, the confrontation with China and the withdrawal from Afghanistan, he's spoken up. He's spoken his mind.
Let's talk about some of the other challenges of the Biden administration. So, because my excuse is that I was on vacation last week, but I'm really, really confused about what the policy is on refugees and whether or not there's a crisis at the border or not.
Well, you're not alone. It seems like the Biden administration is confused about the Biden administration's policy on refugees. Yeah, you saw kind of a strange.
It was strange.
It was really strange. I mean, Joe Biden campaigned on raising the cap on refugees well beyond where it was in the Trump era. He took office and promised he would be raising the cap. Every couple of weeks, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, would get asked in the briefing room about these promises to raise the caps. And then on Friday, we had this weird tango where we had, actually, we're going to keep the caps where they were. Cue progressive outrage, predictable. Yeah. Progressive outrage, and then they backtrack. And now, honestly, I mean, I want to watch the briefing today to see if they lend any clarity to this. We're still in sort of this strange holding pattern where Biden says he wants to raise the refugee cap, but hasn't signed the order. He has fallen back on blaming the Trump administration and saying, well, we wanted to raise the cap, but we inherited this broken immigration process. Okay, maybe, but it's not like the damage to the immigration process was unknown in November of 2020. So we're in a bit of a holding pattern on that. In terms of the border, I mean,
before we get on the refugees, how could they be confused about this? This did seem to be one of the clearest issues. It doesn't come as a surprise. It's not like an event that was not foreseeable. They said that they were ready from day one, and yet somehow they've fumbled this. Why? Do you have any sense about why the administration got queasy about raising the refugee? Were they concerned about the optics of the border? Did they think that it would blow back on them? Why did they why did they back off? I mean, there's obviously a queasiness within the White House about doing something that everybody expected they were going to do anyway.
Sure. I think what I would say, Charlie, is that, and this is kind of the dime store analysis from me, but the border to me, border and immigration more broadly to me, increasingly feels like the Biden administration's closed Guantanamo Bay situation, where they have this statement of principle. It is tinged with a kind of self-righteousness about it, and then it runs headlong into the political reality inside the Beltway. And I think that they were concerned about the blowback. I mean, um, they've been pretty sharp on a couple of issues. They initially categorically refused to send vaccines to Canada and Mexico. This is a little bit in the weeds, Charlie, so bear with me. But
No.
before Justin Trudeau met virtually with President Biden, Jen Psaki was asked, okay, well, Trudeau's coming with a request for vaccines. Are you going to accommodate that? And Jen said no, bluntly. Now, normally what you would get is let's let the meeting take place. I'm not going to prejudge the president. And she just shut it down. She did the same thing with the president of Mexico when the president of Mexico came to visit. So they've been pretty sharp and sharp and not fuzzy and cuddly on a number of issues. This is one where I think a little bit like the Let's Close Gitmo, they come into office with what they regard as a very principled stance, and they run headlong into some of the realities of the politics. They are mindful of poll numbers showing that Biden is popular on the economy. He gets high marks on the pandemic, and the handling of the border is much lower in public opinion polls. So they do see it as a vulnerability. From watching Republican politics that Republicans definitely see it as a Biden vulnerability.
Well, let's talk about then the border. So was it a crisis or not a crisis? Biden says it's a crisis. It's the same thing. Cue some of the outrage, pushback. They back off.
Yeah, I mean, Biden also called it a surge back when the White House was insisting it wasn't. Biden's calling it a crisis when the White House is insisting it isn't. I tend to think that if your facilities are overflowing with migrant children, then the term crisis applies. I don't think. Yeah. I mean, we can sort of have this linguistic argument, but I think that to the degree that these facilities are overwhelmed. And migrants, especially migrant children, are being held in unsanitary conditions. I think we can call it a crisis. I don't think there's anything partisan about saying that. We are seeing, record numbers of unaccompanied children trying to make their way to the United States. That in itself, I wouldn't call a crisis, but the fact that we're not equipped to manage the flows of people trying to cross the border, I think that qualifies as a crisis.
Yeah, I think it does qualify as a crisis. And, what's interesting about it is that Biden has kind of prided himself on blunt, honest talk when it comes to the COVID, the coronavirus, and which I appreciate. It's like, hey, we're making progress. We're not there yet. I'm going to tell you some hard truths about it. And yet he sort of created his own issue by the refusal to call an obvious crisis a crisis. It's not working. Here's another question, and I hate to pick up on what has become now a right-wing talking point, but it's becoming a much louder talking point. Kamala Harris was supposed to be in charge of the border crisis, the whole issue, right? And yet she has gone nowhere near the border. What's that? What's happening there? And why have they decided that are they so allergic to the optics of the vice president being on the border? Are they afraid that would feed the narrative that in fact something is big happening there?
Ooh! I get an opening to bash the mainstream media.
Please.
So Kamala Harris was never in charge of the border. She was. If you go back to the announcement that Joe Biden made, he very clearly said that what she'd be in charge of was the diplomatic outreach to Mexico and to the so-called Northern Triangle countries. It turned into shorthand for the border in the media accounts. But if you go back and look at what he actually announced, she's not in charge of the border. She's in charge of this diplomatic portion of it. So now that doesn't necessarily blunt the point that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have not visited the border. They've not gone to get a firsthand look at the situation there. You could still, of course, make that argument. But they were pretty careful about not entrusting the overall border issue to her as opposed to the diplomatic outreach, which, by the way, is now mired in its own sort of controversies because of that Biden administration proposal to make direct payments to folks in places like Honduras and Guatemala to keep them home.
Yeah, well, thanks for the clarification there. But shouldn't she be then in Guatemala or Honduras?
Yes, I mean this is she's in charge, right? So she's done a couple of virtual diplomatic meetings on this issue, but yeah, right. I mean, we have seen senior administration officials go down to those countries, go to Mexico, go to Honduras, go to Guatemala, but not her. Now she, I think, is expected to make a trip relatively soon to to the region. What her folks are saying, though, is that she only wants to travel down there when she can either sign some kind of agreement or
Okay.
break through some kind of a logjam. In other words, in the jargon of DC, she will only travel there when there are real deliverables, if you
Sure.
will.
She wants to be the closer. Okay, so let's switch gears here. Um, I don't know. Or do you know John Boehner very well? Do you have any relationship with him? I've never met him.
I mean, I covered
Yeah.
Congress. That was actually my first reporting assignment. I went to Congress in January of 1998, which of
Oh,
course was a kind of a momentous time to go cover Congress.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I know John Boehner. I mean, to the degree that we ever know these folks, but yeah, I covered John Boehner for a while. He was great in the 1998 budget talks because he was forever leaving Newt Gingrich's office to get a cigarette, and he would stop on his way in or out to talk to the 5 or 6 of us who were so lucky as to spend our weekends waiting outside of Gingrich's office. So yeah, I know him a little bit.
So what do you make of the book? I have downloaded the book. I have the book. I was going to start on it a couple of days ago, and then of course I open up Twitter, where all wisdom, from which all wisdom flows, and see that he's sitting there on CNN going, yeah, I'd support. I wouldn't have a problem with Trump being the nominee in 2024. I'm obviously now unfairly paraphrasing him, but it was like, what the hell, man? I mean, really, it's like the whole book seems to be how the crazies took over the party, the jerks, the Ted Cruzes, the con men, and he breaks so bad on Donald Trump and what a disaster it was. So what is the point of writing it if you're basically saying, yeah, but I'm still well, maybe that is the point. I'm still an establishment Republican that's learned that, being an establishment Republican needs that if I have to, I will eat any shit sandwich that's served to me.
Yeah, I'm a little puzzled as well because he has done the sort of insult comic route before.
Yeah, right.
This is not the first time he's called Jim Jordan and others legislative terrorists. He did it back in 2017. He did it shortly after being essentially hounded to the exits in 2015. So he's done a lot of this shtick before. One of my columns was basically a list of 4 questions about the book because I don't have my grubby little mitts on the book yet. The one thing I really wanted to read about was what John Boehner said about Newt Gingrich's role in bringing about the kind of smash mouth politics that we have today. The bomb throwing backbencher style of politics. Newt Gingrich was one of the first to realize the potential of the C-SPAN cameras in the House chamber. And you see the style now, but at least Gingrich brought some policy to the table as well. What you're seeing now is much less of the policy and much more of the, I'm drafting my incendiary statement in the back of the town car on the way to, a cable TV hit. So I'd hoped that he would discuss Gingrich's contributions to the current moment. Apparently he does not, which is, I think, a missed opportunity. I'm not really sure what he's doing except for, settling some old scores, making some money. And I think some of the interviews have been really interesting. He voted for Donald Trump in 2020. I didn't expect that.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be fine with Donald Trump being the nominee again. I didn't expect that. He says, "Oh yeah, I totally would have done immigration reform." Well, the record contradicts him on that. He didn't. He very forcefully declined to bring one to the vote to the floor. So I'm not exactly sure what John Boehner is doing. And also, the other thing I'd like to know is I would love to understand his evolution on marijuana.
Oh yeah, I think. Well, maybe he tried it. I mean, look. I mean, if you smoke as much as he does, if you drink as much Merlot as he does, sooner or later you're going to get to pot, right? I mean, it's like it just seems sort of natural to me. I just thought it was that he's all out of bleeps to give in life, which made that comment sort of surprising because if you've got nothing, basically he's got nothing to lose anymore. He has no political future. So if he's willing to say, F you, Ted Cruz, if he's willing to, call out all the people who are the legislative terrorists, why not sort of let it go and say, this is what we need to do? But I guess part of it is that he's kind of become the nowhere man, where he's not willing to engage in the personal introspection of, this is what I should have done and I failed to do. I mean, there's that sort of that sense that if only somebody would have stepped in and done something about it. You were the freaking Speaker of the House of Representatives, and even confronting every single thing, which he knows as well as anyone in Washington, how bad things are, to essentially say, yeah, but I'd go along with it again. It's like, okay, what's the point? What is your point, John Boehner?
Right. For everyone listening, there's a stupendous John Boehner profile by Tim Alberta in Politico magazine from 2017 that I think covers a lot of the ground that this book does or should have. And it is about some of the introspection, and it's about how, even though we're all like watching him, tweet photos from his RV or having a glass or two of Merlot, that he's actually uneasy in retirement. That our collective perception of him, quote unquote, living his best life in retirement is not correct, and that he still has some ghosts to exorcise. As I said, I have not read the book, but one of my friends who has said that the most striking thing about the book is the total absence of Devin Nunes.
Oh, really? Why would that be, do you think?
Well, I don't know, because Nunes was tight in the Boehner inner circle, and Boehner's the one, I hope I'm not getting this wrong. Boehner, I believe, is the one who put Nunes on House Intelligence. And Nunes was a Boehner loyalist. So I'm kind of intrigued. I find that a lot more interesting than the latest rehash of how much John Boehner hates Ted Cruz.
So in terms of the Republican Party, and if John Boehner is kind of a representative of the inability of the Republican Party to move past Trump, how surprising is it, do you think, that Donald Trump's hold on the party is as strong as it is after his defeat, after losing the Senate, after the cataclysm of January 6th? Because I have to say that I've taken a very dark and cynical view of this, but I still find it remarkable. I still find it amazing that the Republican Party remains in so much enthrall, to the point where they are willing to actually scuttle a bipartisan January 6th commission to find out what happened.
I think one of the answers to this, Charlie, is, what's the alternative? Where are the other centers of gravity in the party? There's no Kevin McCarthy wing of the Republican Party. I'm sorry, there just is not. There is not. There's not really a. I mean, I guess this is arguable, but I don't think there's a phalanx of Republicans who want to bring back George W. Bushism. So it's a little one of the reasons that I think he's held a hold on the party is that there aren't a ton of alternatives, and a lot of the issues that animated Trumpism are still with us. And so, as long as the dynamics that created Trumpism are still here, and as long as there's not an alternative, where are Republicans going to go?
Okay, but in the days after January 6th, it did seem that there was a pushback. You even had Mitch McConnell giving the speech that he gave. You have Liz Cheney still out there saying that he should have no role. And yet what happens is, it appears even Nikki Haley, talking to Tim Alberta, said that they would never make that mistake again. They would never go down that road again. And yet they back off very quickly, which raises the, I guess, alternative history. What if everybody would have stuck with where they were on January 7th? What if you're right that there's no center of gravity that's an alternative, but that's in part because of choice, because all of those voices backed off. I mean, you have 7 United States senators, Republican senators, that voted to remove him. I mean, to convict him in the impeachment. You had 10 House members who did it. So I mean, there's at least that core of people who, if they would have stuck to their guns, if they would have been outspoken, if they would have planted the flag, would things possibly have been different?
It's a great question, and I don't really know how to work out the counterfactual there. I would say, Nikki Haley did come out and say that, and then not that long ago, I think it was last week, she was asked about 2024, and she said, if he runs again, I'll stand aside.
Oh my God!
So I think you may have been on vacation for that one, but so there's some. sorry. But yeah, so that's one of the dynamics. The other thing that I think is very interesting has to do with the cash flow into the Republican Party, which is now heavily powered by small donations. Well, it's heavily powered. Actually, it's basically an inverted bell curve where you've got a lot of small donations and a lot of very big donations, and the traditional donors, the traditional corporate America donors, are in a bit of a trough, and so that creates a dynamic where the party leaders are more inclined to cater to the small donors, to the people who were Trump voters, and to cater to these billionaires who fund super PACs. And in both instances, I think you see a dynamic that reinforces Trumpism inside the GOP.
No, I think that's absolutely true. So what do you make of this GOP war with corporate America right now? Because, I mean, obviously there's some real passion. There's a real cultural war issue. But I can't imagine a single member of the Republican House or the Senate voting to raise corporate taxes, for example.
Right. What you're seeing is, but you are seeing at least tentative efforts to strip Major League Baseball of its antitrust protection, right? Antitrust exemption. So I'm not totally sure. I mean, just for your listeners' sake, I mean, I'm old enough to remember back in 2017 when conservatives got very hot under the collar about a performance of William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, in which the director dressed Caesar up to look like Donald Trump. Of course, there's the climactic assassination scene, and conservatives got very. Do you remember the two major corporate donors that backed off, that withdrew their funding from that Shakespeare production?
No,
because one of them is really relevant to today. One of them is Delta Airlines. So I'm a little bit skeptical of the breakup. I think that corporate America still counts on Republicans to deregulate or resist new regulation. I think corporate America still relies mostly on Republicans to avoid corporate tax increases. I say mostly because, of course, if you were a major corporate player in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you could also count on Democrats to help you out. Say, hypothetically, if you were a credit card company or a bank and you incorporated yourself in a very small northeastern state caught between, say, Maryland and New Jersey, Delaware, of course, is what I'm referring to, you could still count on some Democrats siding with you too. I do see the Chamber of Commerce appears to have alienated a lot of Republicans. I think there is. My colleague Jeff Stein wrote a really intelligent and interesting piece last year about the way the pandemic had changed American attitudes towards government, where they want more from government. They want government to come to their help, come to their aid in a way that they didn't necessarily used to. I'm a little bit skeptical of this breakup. I want to see, what the next couple donor cycles look like, and I want to see whether Republicans do melt away in the corporate tax fight. I don't think they will.
No, I think that's it will be interesting, but I think I was actually trying to look it up for a moment. I wasn't able to find it. Your paper had an interesting point, though, that the Republican demonization of corporate America does create kind of an interesting political moment for the Democrats who are trying to raise corporate taxes. It seems like 5 minutes ago, corporate America, they were the quote unquote job creators. They were the engine behind American prosperity. And now that's not a talking point. There's not a sense. So when the Democrats do get around to, if they do, raising corporate taxes, the political environment will feel very different.
I think that's right. I also think that, you're seeing enough resistance among the Senate Democrats to raising the corporate tax to 28% that you don't need the Republicans to all hold the line on this. Right. I think Joe Manchin's going to do at least as much of the heavy lifting as anyone on the GOP side of this.
Yeah, exactly. Olivier Knox, thank you so much for coming back on the Bulwark podcast. You can read Olivier's work on the Daily 202 newsletter at the Washington Post. I strongly recommend it. It is one of the things that I read religiously every single day. So, Olivier, thanks for coming back.
My pleasure, Charlie.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do this all over again.